all that mattered was the fact that I was to do well, and it was my bounden duty to work hard on behalf of the people of Canada. And I have always had a preoccupation with man's inhumanity to man within intimate relations, within family relationships. And I set out to do something about that.
When I see what's happening at York, a multicultural society, the students to me are going to be the new thinkers of the world.
Between 1914 and 1916, they fought the fight. They fought to be allowed to be patriots. They fought to be allowed to go overseas to defend their country, support democracy. And when they were finally allowed in 1916, it was not carrying rifles, it was not armed, but as a non-combatant unit.
Racism began with me, I would say, at birth, but I fought on my own terms and with my own weapons. You get your foot in the door, and after that, you open the door for others, and you don't try to close the door once you're in and to feel that you're something special because you are not.
As a young child growing up in Flemington Park in Toronto, like a lot of young girls, we got up and we played hockey out on the streets. And, you know, it's just been the love of my life. And like a lot of hockey players will say to you as they were growing up, they just lived and eat and drank hockey.
I had been focused on that race alone the entire year. All of my training, all of my dedications, commitments, you know, sleep schedule, food, therapy, every single thing was about that afternoon, that day, that race.
In 2000, when I went to the Olympics, went through a lot of the qualifying matches and got all the way up to the final match. Won in the final match against Russia. And we're on the podium and they give it to me from Canada and they put the medal around your neck. And to be honest, you are almost in a trance. It's almost like you're standing in one place and the whole world is kind of rotating around you.
Racism is not just a social justice issue, but it's also a health issue. Healthcare leaders in Canada speak out about this issue. So this is a quote from Dr. Gary Newton, who's president and CEO of the Mount Sinai Hospital Health System in Toronto. It's important we all understand that inequity and racism are disease equivalents in terms of their impact. They contribute to complexity and poor outcomes in the same way diabetes and hypertension do.
In fact, there were some radio stations here that were forbidden to play urban music. And it was really not played until we got on the air in 2001. Everyone in the city listened. There were more people that weren't black that were listening to the station than black people, which was very pleasing to me. Part of our mandate was to encourage Canadian talent, which we did, and we think quite successfully. Hence, we had all these different genres of programs.
There are three things we must have. The first is we must have a sound intellectual framework for making decisions. The second is we must have emotional control. And thirdly, we must have access. Access to opportunities, access to financing, access to great people. If we have two out of three, we won't be successful.
Like dance being, of the moment and being such an ephemeral experience for an audience, I think what I'm seeing develop is a very fresh, new, and exciting piece that is very different from the past experience. So it's like a new ballet all over again.
With the power of the media, when something's put out there, people see that and they go, oh, because you've seen it, you think, well, that must have happened. It's someone's perception and someone's perspective and someone's illustration of what history, of what happened in history when it may or may not, and most likely is not true. So you have to consider the source.
I mean, as an artist, you know, you're always trying to make sense of the world and your place in it. And I think what's so amazing about films is that you can see a story and it relates to your own personal experience. So you watch a film from, say, Russia, for instance, and you're, you know, a kid growing up in Regent Park in Toronto.
African Americans came and populated southwestern Ontario before European settlers. And I love Canada and I love being a resident of Toronto, but I've always felt that in terms of the work we do, that we actually have to push to really broaden the scope of what we understand Canadians to be and the stories that we have.
Going back to photography as being kind of a bourgeois technology of representation made for the bourgeoisie in the area of their ascendants in the early 19th century. It kind of depicts their view of the world as sort of individual subject, solitary subject that depicts coming from perspective is encased in the medium of photography. Just as VR somehow, it is less liberatory than the bourgeois medium of photography is.
I think that diversity and digitalization are not only changing the way we live and work, they are shaping the way that we think and feel. As leaders, both in today's centers of learning and as leaders in the future, you cannot sit back and be content to watch events unfold. You must get engaged. You must become agents of change, agents of positive and lasting change.
We may not be able to overcome an obstacle or a barrier at a given time, but we do have the power to determine whether or not we accept the beliefs or the rationale which gave rise to the barrier.
You know, because I'm a writer, I'm ambivalent about everything. I can never bring it down to one thing. I always feel like a year from now, I'll actually be able to tell you how I felt today. I was born in Trinidad in 1957. Storytelling was a way to accommodate myself with Canada. Trinidad was still there in the stories, and so I felt more at ease in Canada, which was pretty strange compared to Trinidad. Cold and weird.
I think what excites me most about the current Canadian literature scene is the number of writers working today who have backgrounds and experiences that haven't been represented before. I think this is a really exciting moment in writing done in Canada and perhaps in that idea of Canadian literature.
Poetry is a liberatory work for me, reflecting, intuiting, making sense of, and undoing the times we live in. Poetry works at the core of where the world gets articulated and amplified. And I listen and monitor for the shifts in tenor and cadence and resonance of the languages of power. And I try to retrieve in my work that which is crushed under that language.
I look at myself now and I say, I am the positive result of extremely negative histories. Slavery, imperialism, colonialism. Even though that history was extremely negative, and I recognize that, and I assert that, and I remind everybody of that. I want people to understand that the West and the North of the globe is rich because so many other people are exploited and oppressed and ripped off in major ways for centuries. And that's why there's a global imbalance in wealth.
And all the previous interviews I had with other members of your program, it was all about my competences, you know, my views on social issues, and you asking me if I can integrate. And then, you know, he lost patience and he said, well, you have to realize you'll be the first Black person in the newsroom. So I stood and I said, you know what? I think we're going to stop that conversation right here. I think there's a problem, and I'm not a problem. The problem is on your side. Thank you.